I never thought a certified letter on a Tuesday morning would be the catalyst for the most satisfying revenge of my life. But there I was, staring at a $300 fine for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours. My name is Quinton Vance, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Springs community in Scottsdale, Arizona, for about 8 months. The development was one of those upscale planned communities with perfectly manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and apparently an HOA board with nothing better to do than measure how long garbage cans stayed on the curb. I worked as a commercial real estate investor, which meant I spent most of my time analyzing properties, negotiating deals, and occasionally making what most people would consider insane purchases. My neighbors had no idea what I actually did for a living. I kept to myself, maintained my property, and assumed that would be enough. It wasn't. The letter was signed by Karen Butterfield, HOA president, in aggressive blue ink that had nearly torn through the paper. According to the notice, my garbage cans had been visible from the street since 6 in the morning on trash day, and I hadn't brought them in until after 4 in the afternoon, when I got home from a property viewing in Phoenix. Apparently, the HOA bylaws stated that trash receptacles must be returned to their storage location within 2 hours of collection. I had violated this sacred rule by approximately 8 hours. I called the HOA office immediately. A bored-sounding woman answered on the 4th ring. Meadowbrook Springs HOA, this is Patricia speaking. Hi, this is Quinton Vance from 4782 Desert Willow Drive. I just received a fine for my trash cans, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was at work. I brought them in as soon as I got home. One moment, please, I heard typing. Yes, Mr. Vance. The fine is valid. Trash receptacles must be stored within 2 hours of collection per Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Community Bylaws. I understand that, but I was at work. I'm a single guy living alone. I can't exactly leave work to rush home and move trash cans. The bylaws don't provide exceptions for work schedules, Mr. Vance. The fine stands. You have 30 days to pay, or we'll place a lien on your property. I felt my jaw tighten. Can I at least appeal this to the board? You can request to appear at the next board meeting. That's 3 weeks from Thursday at 7 p.m. in the Clubhouse. You'll need to submit your request in writing within 5 business days. I thanked her and hung up, already drafting the appeal letter in my head. $300 wasn't going to bankrupt me, but it was the principle of the thing. I had bought my house for cash, paid my HOA dues on time every month, and never caused any problems. This felt like harassment over something completely trivial. The next morning, I dropped off my appeal letter at the HOA office, which was located in a small administrative building near the community entrance. Patricia barely looked up when I handed it to her. "We'll add you to the agenda," she said, stamping my letter with the date. I thought that would be the end of it until the board meeting. I was wrong. 4 days later, I came home to find another letter taped to my front door. This one informed me that my front yard landscaping was not in compliance with community standards. Specifically, one of my desert sage bushes had grown beyond the permitted height of 4 feet, and my decorative rocks were the wrong shade of brown compared to the approved color palette. The fine for this violation was $500. I stood on my driveway, staring at my perfectly normal front yard. The desert sage bush in question was maybe 4 feet and 2 inches tall. The rocks had been installed by the previous owner and had been there for 3 years before I bought the place. Nobody had ever said anything about them. I pulled out my phone and took detailed photos of everything, then walked down the street to look at my neighbors' yards. 3 houses down, The Richardsons had a prickly pear cactus that was easily 6 feet tall. 2 houses in the other direction, the Chens had bright red decorative rocks that definitely weren't on any approved color palette I could imagine. Neither of them had violation notices on their doors. This was targeted. This was personal, and I had no idea why. I decided to do some research. That evening, I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws and read through all 247 pages. It was mind-numbing stuff, filled with regulations about everything from fence heights to the acceptable breeds of dogs. But buried in the middle, I found something interesting. The HOA board had the authority to levy fines, but those fines could be challenged. And if a pattern of selective enforcement could be demonstrated, the fines could be invalidated and the board members could be held personally liable. I started documenting everything. I drove through the entire neighborhood over the next week, photographing every possible bylaw violation I could find. Trash cans left out past the 2-hour limit, landscaping issues, unauthorized paint colors, cars parked on the street overnight. I found 63 violations that were identical to or worse than my supposed infractions. None of those homeowners had notices on their doors. The board meeting couldn't come fast enough. I showed up 15 minutes early with a thick folder of photographs and documentation. The clubhouse was a beautiful building with high ceilings, expensive light fixtures, and a wall of windows overlooking the community pool. About 20 other homeowners were scattered around the room, most of them looking annoyed or worried. Karen Butterfield sat at the head table with 4 other board members. She was exactly what I had pictured. A woman in her late 40s with an aggressive blonde bob, too much makeup, and the kind of thin-lipped expression that suggested she had never experienced joy. She wore a bright pink blazer and had a gavel in front of her that she definitely enjoyed using too much. "This meeting will come to order," she announced, banging the gavel twice. "First order of business, approval of last month's minutes." I sat through 45 minutes of the most tedious administrative discussion I had ever witnessed. They debated the exact wording of a motion about pool towel racks for 20 minutes. Finally, Karen looked down at her agenda. "Next, we have appeals. First up, Quinton Vance regarding a trash receptacle violation." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Thank you for hearing my appeal. I received a $300 fine for leaving my trash cans out too long. I was at work and couldn't get home earlier. I'd like to request that the fine be waived since this was an unavoidable circumstance." Karen didn't even pretend to consider it. "Request denied. The rules apply to everyone equally, Mr. Vance. If we make exceptions, the entire system breaks down." I opened my folder. "That's interesting, because I have documentation here showing 63 similar violations throughout the community over the past 2 weeks. None of those homeowners received fines." Her face went red. "That's not relevant to your violation." "Actually, it is. Selective enforcement violates Arizona HOA law. If you're only enforcing rules against certain homeowners, that's discrimination." One of the other board members, an older man whose name tag read Robert Finch, leaned forward. "Mrs. Butterfield, perhaps we should review Mr. Vance's documentation." "There's nothing to review. The fine stands. Next appeal." "I'm not done," I said, keeping my voice level. "I also received a $500 fine for landscaping violations. Again, I have photos showing that my yard is consistent with or better maintained than most homes in this community, and I have specific examples of homes with more significant violations that haven't been fined." Karen stood up. "Your landscaping is not up to community standards, Mr. Vance. Perhaps if you spent less time harassing your neighbors and photographing their homes, You'd have more time to maintain your own property. I'm not harassing anyone. I'm documenting selective enforcement, and I'd like to know why I'm being specifically targeted. You're not being targeted. This meeting is over for you. Sit down or leave. I held up my folder. I have 63 documented violations. I have photos with timestamps. If this board doesn't rescind both fines and commit to equal enforcement of all rules, I'll be filing a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. The room went silent. Several homeowners pulled out their phones, probably to look up what that meant. Karen's face had gone from red to purple. Are you threatening this board, Mr. Vance? I'm informing you of my rights under Arizona HOA law. The Department of Real Estate oversees HOA compliance. If there's evidence of selective enforcement, discrimination, or board misconduct, they investigate. Would you like me to file that complaint? Robert Finch cleared his throat. Mrs. Butterfield, perhaps we should table this discussion and review the matter more thoroughly. There's nothing to review, Karen snapped. And furthermore, effective immediately, Mr. Vance's pool privileges are revoked for threatening the board and creating a hostile environment. I stared at her. You're revoking my pool access because I cited Arizona law. I'm revoking your pool access because you've demonstrated an inability to follow community rules and have shown hostility toward this board. The decision is final. I looked at the other board members. 2 of them looked uncomfortable. One woman was nodding along with Karen. Robert Finch looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. This is retaliation, I said, and it's illegal. Leave now, Mr. Vance, or I'll have you escorted out. I left, but I wasn't defeated. I was furious. The pool access was actually something I used regularly. I swam laps every morning before work. It was one of the main reasons I had bought in this community. And now, because I had dared to stand up for myself, I was being punished. I spent that night researching Arizona HOA law in detail. I also did something else. I started looking into the Meadowbrook Springs HOA itself. Where did the money go? Who owned what? What were the actual financial arrangements behind this community? What I found was interesting. The clubhouse, the pool, and the common areas weren't owned by the HOA. They were owned by a property management company called Desert Holdings LLC, which leased the facilities to the HOA for a monthly fee. The lease agreement was in the public record, and when I pulled it up, I nearly dropped my coffee. The lease was criminally cheap. Desert Holdings was charging the HOA $12,000 per year for use of a clubhouse and pool facility that was easily worth 10 times that in annual rental value. The lease had been in place for 15 years and was up for renewal in 6 months. I dug deeper into Desert Holdings LLC. It was a small company, privately held, and according to the Arizona Corporation Commission records, it had been founded 20 years ago by a real estate developer named George Pritchard. He had built Meadowbrook Springs, retained ownership of the common facilities, and set up the sweetheart lease with the HOA. Then I found George Pritchard's obituary. He had died 3 years ago. The company had passed to his daughter, Margaret Pritchard, who apparently had no interest in property management. According to some quick internet research, she lived in Seattle and worked as a software engineer. I made a phone call. It took 2 days to track down Margaret's number, but when I finally reached her, she was surprisingly friendly. Desert Holdings, she said. God, I forgot I even owned that. It was my dad's thing. I just have an accountant who handles it. The HOA pays some small amount every year, and I've never thought about it. Would you be interested in selling? I asked. Selling the company? I guess so. I don't really know what it's worth. I'd like to make you an offer. The clubhouse and pool facility are valuable assets. I'm a real estate investor, and I think I could get fair market value out of them. We talked for another 30 minutes. Margaret was smart, asked good questions, and clearly knew I was interested for a reason. But she was also pragmatic. She didn't want to deal with property management, and she lived 2 states away. By the end of the conversation, we had agreed to have the property appraised by a mutually agreed upon third party, and we'd go from there. The appraisal came back at $1.2 million. The clubhouse was a 4,000 square foot building with a commercial kitchen, event space, and office facilities. The pool was Olympic length with a full filtration system that was only 3 years old. The land itself was 2 acres in a prime Scottsdale location. I offered Margaret $900,000 cash. She countered at $1 million. We settled at $950,000, and I had my attorney draw up the paperwork. 3 weeks later, I owned Desert Holdings LLC and, by extension, the Meadowbrook Springs Clubhouse and Pool. I didn't tell anyone. I kept going to work, came home, and maintained my property. I paid my HOA dues. I didn't use the pool since my access had been revoked. I waited. The existing lease had 6 months remaining. I spent that time doing research on market rate facility leases for similar properties in Scottsdale. I also had a property management attorney review the lease agreement to make sure I understood every clause. The lease had a provision that either party could terminate with 90 days' notice, or it would automatically renew for another 5-year term. It also had a clause allowing the property owner to renegotiate terms if the property value had increased significantly. I sent the 90-day termination notice exactly on time, addressed to Karen Butterfield as HOA president. Then I waited. It took 4 days for my phone to ring. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Is this Quinton Vance?" It was Karen's voice, but without the usual hostility. She sounded confused, speaking. "This is Karen Butterfield from the Meadowbrook Springs HOA. We received a lease termination notice from Desert Holdings regarding the clubhouse and pool facilities. There seems to be some mistake. Our lease doesn't expire for 6 months, and we have an automatic renewal clause." "There's no mistake," I said. "The 90-day termination notice is valid under Section 7 of the lease agreement. Either party can terminate with proper notice. The lease will end in 90 days. "But we've had this lease for 15 years. Who is this? Is this George Pritchard's daughter?" "No, Desert Holdings was sold. I'm the new owner." There was a long pause. Me. "You can't do this. The HOA needs those facilities. We have over 400 homes in this community." "I understand that. That's why I'm willing to negotiate a new lease." "At what rate?" "Market rate. I've had comparable properties assessed. For a facility of this size and quality, market rate is approximately $15,000 per month." I heard her gasp. "15,000? That's absurd. We currently pay $1,000 per month." Which was a sweetheart deal that George Pritchard gave the HOA when he developed the community. I'm not George Pritchard. I'm a real estate investor, and I need market returns on my assets. This is extortion. No, this is business. You're welcome to seek alternative facilities if you can find something cheaper. But I should let you know that the nearest comparable clubhouse and pool would require your residents to drive about 8 miles. And that facility charges $18,000 per month. We can't afford $15,000 per month. That would require us to triple the HOA dues. That's not my problem, Mrs. Butterfield. You have 90 days to decide if you want to negotiate a new lease or find alternative arrangements. She hung up on me. I smiled. 2 days later, I received a cease and desist letter from an attorney representing the HOA. It claimed that my termination of the lease was improper, that I had a conflict of interest as a homeowner in the community, and that I was acting in bad faith. I forwarded it to my attorney, who laughed and sent back a response explaining that everything I had done was perfectly legal, that homeowners were not prohibited from owning property that they leased to the HOA, and that the lease termination was valid under the clear terms of the agreement. The HOA held an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I heard about it from my neighbor, Tom, who lived 3 houses down. Tom was a retired accountant who thought the HOA board was corrupt and had been collecting his own documentation for years. "They're panicking," he told me over his fence one evening. "Karen is telling everyone that you're trying to destroy the community. She's saying you're doing this as revenge for the fines." "Am I?" I asked innocently. Tom grinned. "I don't know, but I fully support it. That woman has been a tyrant for 5 years. She fined me $200 last year because my desert willow was supposedly the wrong species. It was the exact species specified in the bylaws, but she insisted it looked wrong. Did you fight it?" I tried. "She shut me down, just like she did to you. Most people just pay the fines because it's easier than dealing with her." I nodded. "Well, she's about to find out that I don't mind dealing with difficult people." The 90 days ticked down. I received 3 more calls from Karen, each one angrier than the last. She threatened to sue me. She threatened to have the other homeowners boycott me. She threatened to report me to the Department of Real Estate for harassment, which was rich coming from her. I stayed calm and repeated the same message: market rate lease or find alternative facilities. With 30 days left on the lease, the HOA board finally requested a formal meeting with me to negotiate. I agreed and showed up at the clubhouse at the scheduled time with my attorney. Karen was there with the full board and their attorney, a nervous-looking young man who kept adjusting his glasses. Robert Finch was there, along with the 3 other board members I recognized from the meeting where my pool access had been revoked. "Mr. Vance," Karen began, her voice dripping with false politeness, "we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. Of course. We've reviewed your proposed lease terms and they're simply not feasible for our community. We're prepared to offer you $3,000 per month, which is a 250% increase from our current rate." I shook my head. "Market rate is $15,000 per month. That's non-negotiable." "Be reasonable," Robert Finch said. "We've been leasing this property for 15 years. There's a relationship here." "There was a relationship with George Pritchard," I said. "I'm not George Pritchard, and I don't have any obligation to continue a below-market lease that was based on his personal goodwill." Karen leaned forward. "If you force this through, we'll have no choice but to raise HOA dues significantly. You'll be hurting every homeowner in this community, including yourself." "I pay my HOA dues like everyone else. If they go up, I'll pay the increase." "This is because of the fines, isn't it?" she snapped. "This is revenge. This is business," I replied. "Although I will point out that if you had treated me fairly from the beginning, we might not be here. But honestly, even if you had, I still would have bought this property when the opportunity arose, and I still would be charging market rate." "You're destroying this community," she said. "No, I'm running a business. You're the one who has to explain to the homeowners why their dues are going up. And when they ask why the HOA was paying such a low rate for 15 years and didn't negotiate a longer-term lease or try to purchase the property, that's on you." The HOA's attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Vance, would you consider a gradual increase? Perhaps we could start at $5,000 per month and increase by $2,000 per year until we reach your target rate." I considered it. My attorney had advised me that a gradual increase might be more defensible if this went to court, though we both believed I had a strong legal position either way. I'll agree to a 2-year phase-in, I said. $10,000 per month for the first year, $15,000 per month after that. 5-year lease term with a 3% annual increase after year 2 to account for inflation. Karen looked like she wanted to throw something at me. That's still outrageous. That's my offer. Take it or leave it. You have 30 days. The meeting ended with no agreement. I left feeling confident. They didn't have any good alternatives. With 2 weeks left on the lease, I received another call. This time it was Robert Finch. "Mr. Vance, I want to apologize for how you've been treated by this board," he said. "Karen has a tendency to be overzealous, and the fines you received were inappropriate. I should have spoken up at that meeting. I appreciate that. I'm calling because I want you to know that I've been advocating internally for accepting your lease terms. The math is clear. We either pay you market rate or we lose access to the facilities that are central to our community. Some board members are still resistant, but I think we'll get there. I hope so. I also want to ask if you'd consider reinstatement of your pool privileges." The revocation was retaliatory and improper. I can bring a motion to the board. "I appreciate the gesture," I said. "But honestly, I'm not interested in swimming in a pool controlled by a board that has shown such hostility toward me. If we reach a lease agreement, I'll include a clause that guarantees my pool access as a condition of the lease, along with a provision prohibiting any HOA retaliation against me." Robert laughed. "Fair enough. I'll see what I can do." 3 days before the lease expired, I received a formal offer from the HOA. They agreed to my terms: $10,000 per month for year 1, $15,000 per month thereafter, 5-year term, 3% annual increases, and a clause guaranteeing my pool access and prohibiting retaliation. They also agreed to rescind all fines against me and issue a formal apology letter. I signed the lease. My attorney filed it with the county. It was done. The HOA held another emergency meeting to announce the dues increase. Tom called me afterward to give me the recap. "It was beautiful," he said. "Karen tried to spin it as your fault, but at least 50 homeowners stood up and pointed out that the old lease was absurdly cheap and that any competent board would have anticipated this problem. Someone actually called for a vote of no confidence in her leadership." Did it pass? Not yet, but there's a petition circulating. She might not survive the next election cycle. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just because I had made a profitable real estate deal, but because I had stood up to a bully and won. But the story didn't end there. 2 months into the new lease, I received a call from Patricia at the HOA office. Her voice was shaking. "Mr. Vance, I need to talk to you about something. In person. Can you come to the office?" I drove over, curious. Patricia met me at the door and ushered me into a back room away from where anyone might overhear. "I don't know if I should be doing this," she said, "but I think you should know. Karen has been embezzling money from the HOA." I stared at her. "What?" "I've been the office manager here for 8 years. I handle the books, process the dues payments, pay the bills. About 6 months ago, Karen told me she was taking over some of the financial management herself. She said the board wanted more direct oversight. She's been having me cut checks to various vendors for maintenance, landscaping, pool cleaning, things like that. Okay. I finally looked up some of these vendors. They don't exist. The addresses are fake. The phone numbers go nowhere. I think she's been creating fake invoices and depositing the checks into accounts she controls." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How much are we talking about?" "I've found at least $40,000 over the past 6 months. There might be more." I only started looking because one of the homeowners complained that the pool looked dirty and asked why we weren't paying for regular cleaning anymore. We were paying for it, or at least We were cutting checks, but the pool wasn't being cleaned. Have you told the other board members? I told Robert Finch. He's the treasurer. He was horrified. He's been doing his own investigation. He asked me to reach out to you because you have experience with real estate and financial matters. He thought you might know what to do. This needs to be reported to the police, I said immediately. This is fraud. If she's been embezzling HOA funds, that's a crime. Patricia nodded. Robert was afraid of that. He wanted to handle it internally, but I told him we can't. This is too big. You absolutely can't handle this internally. If you try to cover it up or just remove her quietly, you could all be implicated. This needs to be reported, investigated properly, and prosecuted if the evidence supports it. Robert Finch called me that evening. Patricia told me she talked to you. She did. Robert, you need to call the police. Tonight. I know. I've been trying to convince the other board members, but they're worried about the publicity. They think it will hurt property values if people find out the HOA president was embezzling. It will hurt property values a lot more if it comes out that the board knew about embezzlement and covered it up. You have a fiduciary duty to the homeowners. You need to report this, he sighed. You're right. I'll make the call. The next morning, 2 detectives from the Scottsdale Police Department showed up at the HOA office. They spent 6 hours going through records with Patricia and Robert. By that evening, they had enough evidence to obtain a warrant. They arrested Karen Butterfield at her home the following day. The charges included theft, fraud, and forgery. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Meadowbrook Springs was all over the Phoenix area television stations. Former HOA president arrested for embezzlement, the headlines read. There was video of Karen being led out of her house in handcuffs, looking nothing like the confident tyrant who had presided over board meetings with her gavel. The investigation revealed that she had stolen over $70,000 from the HOA over the course of 3 years. She had been creating fake vendor invoices, cutting checks, and depositing them into accounts held in the names of shell companies she had created. The money had gone toward a vacation home in California, a new car, and various personal expenses. The HOA had to hire a forensic accountant to untangle the full extent of the fraud. They also had to explain to all 400 homeowners what had happened and how they planned to recover the stolen funds. It was a nightmare for the board, but they handled it as well as they could. Robert Finch was elected as the new HOA president. One of his first acts was to issue a formal apology to me, not just for the fines, but for how I had been treated by the previous administration. We failed in our duty to run this organization with integrity, he said at a community meeting I actually attended. Mr. Vance was treated unfairly, and when he stood up for himself, he was retaliated against. I'm grateful that he had the resources and knowledge to fight back, but I'm ashamed that it was necessary. The homeowners gave him a round of applause. Several people came up to me afterward to shake my hand and thank me for exposing what had been happening. Karen Butterfield eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and theft. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though her attorney admitted she didn't have the assets to cover most of what she had stolen. The HOA's insurance covered some of the loss, but the community still took a financial hit. As for me, I continued to live in my house at Meadowbrook Springs. I swam laps in the pool every morning, enjoying the peaceful water and the sunrise over the desert. My lease with the HOA was generating solid returns, and I had established myself as someone who couldn't be pushed around. Tom, my neighbor, became a good friend. We had barbecues in his backyard and laughed about how the whole situation had turned out. You know what the best part is? He said one evening as we sat on his patio with beers. "You didn't just get revenge. You actually made the community better. Karen was corrupt, and nobody had the guts to really challenge her until you came along." "I didn't know she was corrupt when I started," I admitted. "I just didn't want to pay an unfair fine. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person willing to say no." The new board under Robert's leadership was competent and fair. They enforced the bylaws consistently, which meant some homeowners who had been getting away with violations now had to comply. But nobody was being targeted or singled out. The fines were reasonable and only issued for genuine violations that affected the community. They also implemented new financial controls to prevent any future embezzlement. All checks required 2 signatures. Monthly financial reports were posted online for all homeowners to review. An independent audit was conducted annually. Property values in Meadowbrook Springs actually increased after the scandal, once people saw that the community had cleaned house and was being run properly. New buyers were attracted to the transparency and accountability. I eventually became friendly with several other board members and was even asked to join the board myself, though I declined. I didn't want that kind of responsibility. I was happy being a regular homeowner who also happened to be the community's landlord for the common facilities. The lease arrangement worked well. The HOA made their payments on time every month. I maintained the property to a high standard, making improvements and upgrades that benefited everyone. When the pool heater needed to be replaced, I split the cost with the HOA since it was a capital improvement that increased the property value. About a year after Karen's arrest, I was swimming laps one morning when Robert came out to the pool area. He sat on one of the lounge chairs and waited for me to finish my workout. "Morning, Quinton," he said as I toweled off. "Morning, Robert. What's up? I wanted to give you a heads up. We're considering purchasing the clubhouse and pool from you. We've rebuilt our reserves after the embezzlement situation, and the board thinks it would be good for the community to own the facilities outright rather than leasing them." I nodded slowly. "That's a reasonable position. What kind of offer are you thinking about?" "We're prepared to offer you $1.3 million. That's about 30% above what you paid, plus it would free you from the maintenance obligations." I considered it. The lease was generating about $180,000 per year in revenue, which was a solid return on my initial investment. But owning the property also came with responsibilities and risks. If something major broke, I was on the hook for it. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. No rush. I just wanted to gauge your interest before we brought it to a full vote." I thought about it for a week. On one hand, I had made my point. I had stood up to Karen's bullying, exposed her corruption, and made a tidy profit on my investment. On the other hand, the lease was a good long-term income stream, and I wasn't in a hurry to sell. I called Robert. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in selling right now. The lease is working well for both of us. Maybe in a few years if circumstances change." "Fair enough. The offer stands if you change your mind." Things settled into a comfortable routine after that. I continued my work as a real estate investor, buying and selling commercial properties throughout Arizona. Meadowbrook Springs was my home base, a place where I could relax and enjoy the community without drama. I did start dating someone about 18 months after the whole situation concluded. Her name was Natalie, and she was a teacher at a nearby elementary school. She thought the entire story was hilarious when I finally told her about it on our 4th date. "So let me get this straight," she said, laughing. "The HOA president fined you for your trash cans. You bought the building she was holding meetings in, and then she went to prison for stealing from the HOA. That's the short version, yes." That's the most satisfying revenge story I've ever heard. It wasn't really about revenge, I said, though I was smiling. It was about fairness. Sure, she said, grinning. Whatever you need to tell yourself. Tom threw me a birthday party the following year, inviting half the neighborhood to his backyard. It was surreal standing there with a beer in my hand, talking to people who 2 years earlier had probably thought I was the villain for raising the lease rates. Now they understood that I had been fair, that the old lease had been an unsustainable anomaly, and that the current arrangement was actually good for everyone. One of the homeowners, a woman named Sandra who lived near the community entrance, came up to me during the party. "I need to apologize to you," she said. "For what?" "When the lease situation first happened, I was one of the people who signed a petition to try to force you to keep the old rates. I thought you were being greedy. I didn't understand that you were just asking for fair market value. And I definitely didn't know what Karen was doing behind the scenes." "It's okay," I said. "I understand why people were upset. Nobody likes their dues going up. Still, I was wrong, and I'm grateful for what you did exposing her. Who knows how much more she would have stolen if you hadn't pushed back against her." That was the thing that surprised me most about the whole experience. I had started out just trying to fight an unfair fine, and I had ended up uncovering actual criminal activity. If I had just paid the $300 and kept my head down like most people, Karen would probably still be embezzling money and abusing her power. Sometimes standing up for yourself accomplishes more than you ever intended. The years passed peacefully. The HOA continued to function well under Robert's leadership, and eventually under new presidents as board terms rotated. The community stayed beautiful, property values remained strong, and I continued to collect my lease payments every month. I never did get another fine for my trash cans. Karen Butterfield was released from prison after serving 2.5 years of her 4-year sentence. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that she had moved to Nevada and was working as a receptionist at a car dealership. She was prohibited from serving on any HOA board as part of her plea agreement. I never spoke to her again, and I was fine with that. 5 years after I bought Desert Holdings LLC, Robert approached me again about purchasing the clubhouse and pool. This time, they offered $1.5 million. The HOA had continued to build its reserves and wanted the security of owning the facilities outright. I accepted the offer. I had gotten excellent returns on my investment. The lease had been trouble-free for 5 years, and I was ready to simplify my portfolio. The sale closed smoothly, and I walked away with a substantial profit. I stayed in my house in Meadowbrook Springs, though. It was home. The community had matured into exactly what it should have been from the beginning, a well-run, fair, and pleasant place to live. Tom and I still had our regular barbecues. Natalie and I got married in a small ceremony at a venue in downtown Scottsdale, and we talked about starting a family. Life was good. One evening, about 6 years after that first certified letter had arrived about my trash cans, I was sitting on my back patio watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. Natalie was inside making dinner, and I could hear her singing along to something on the radio. I thought about how differently things could have gone. If I had just paid the fines and accepted Karen's abusive power, I would have been out $800, but I would have avoided all the conflict. I probably never would have bought the clubhouse. Karen might have continued embezzling for years. The community would have continued to suffer under her petty tyranny, but I hadn't taken the easy path. I had fought back, even when it seemed like a trivial issue about garbage cans. And that choice had led to consequences I never could have predicted. It reminded me of something my father had told me when I was young. Stand up for yourself, even over small things. Because if you don't, the small things become big things, and eventually you forget how to stand at all. He had been right. The trash cans had been a small thing, but Karen's fines had been a symptom of a larger problem. A person with unchecked power who faced no consequences for her actions. By refusing to accept her abuse, I had ended up exposing corruption, helping my community, and making a profit that had significantly advanced my career as a real estate investor. Not bad for a guy who just didn't want to pay a $300 fine. Natalie called me in for dinner, and I stood up from my chair, taking one last look at the desert sunset. The community pool sparkled in the fading light, and I could see a few families playing in the water. Kids were laughing, parents were relaxing, and everything was exactly as it should be. I walked inside to join my wife, grateful for the series of events that had brought me to this moment. Sometimes the best things in life come from refusing to back down, even when it would be easier to just pay the fine and move on. And sometimes, the person who tries to punish you ends up giving you the opportunity to change everything. I never regretted standing up to Karen Butterfield. Not for a single moment. The story could have ended there, but life has a way of adding interesting footnotes. About 8 years after the initial trash can incident, I was having lunch with Robert at a cafe near our neighborhood. He had stepped down as HOA president after 6 years of excellent service and was enjoying his retirement. "Did you hear Karen Butterfield died?" he said casually as he sipped his iced tea. I looked up from my sandwich. "No, I hadn't heard that." "Yeah, apparently she had a heart attack about 3 months ago." I only found out because her sister reached out to the HOA to ask if there was any kind of memorial or acknowledgement we wanted to make. "What did you tell her?" Robert shrugged. I expressed condolences for her loss, but explained that given the circumstances of Karen's departure from the community, we didn't think a memorial was appropriate. The sister understood. She actually apologized for what Karen had done. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. I didn't feel happy about Karen's death. She had been a difficult person who had made bad choices, but she was still a human being. Her time in prison had apparently been her consequence, and she had been trying to rebuild her life afterward. "That's sad," I said finally. "Despite everything, I don't wish that on anyone." "You're a better person than me," Robert said. "I'm not celebrating her death, but I'm not mourning it either. She caused a lot of damage to a lot of people." We finished our lunch and talked about other things. The HOA was running smoothly under new leadership. The community continued to thrive. My lease payment had been replaced with the one-time sale profit, which I had reinvested into other properties that were doing well. Life moved on, the way it always does. Years continued to pass. Natalie and I had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, who grew up swimming in that same community pool. They never knew the story of how their father had stood up to the HOA president and ended up owning the building where their swim lessons were held. To them, it was just home. Tom eventually moved to Colorado to be closer to his grandchildren, but we stayed in touch. He sent me a card every year on the anniversary of the date I had first appeared before the HOA board to appeal my fines. "Happy Independence Day," the cards always said, with a photo of whatever beautiful Colorado landscape he was enjoying that year. I kept the cards in a box in my office, along with copies of all the documentation from that period. The fine notices, the photos of neighborhood violations, the lease agreements, the news articles about Karen's arrest. It was a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that fairness is worth fighting for, and that you never know where your choices might lead. My real estate investment career flourished over the years, built in part on the confidence and experience I had gained from the Meadowbrook Springs situation. I learned that knowledge was power, that documentation was essential, and that calm persistence could overcome almost any obstacle. I also learned that communities work best when they are run with integrity and transparency. The years under Karen's leadership had been marked by fear and favoritism. The years after her removal were marked by fairness and cooperation. The difference was night and day. Eventually, my kids grew old enough to hear the story. My son, who was 12 at the time, thought it was the coolest thing he had ever heard. "So you actually bought the building where she was having the meetings?" he asked, his eyes wide. "I did." "And then you made them pay more money?" "I charged them the fair market rate for what the building was worth," I explained. "The old rate was way too low. It wasn't sustainable." "But you did it because she was mean to you, right?" I considered how to answer that. "I did it because it was a good business opportunity." But yes, the fact that she had been unfair to me made me more motivated to look for opportunities where I could level the playing field. "That's so cool," he said. My daughter, who was 10, had a different take. "Was she a bad person? She made bad choices," I said. "She abused her power and then she stole money. Those were very wrong things to do, but I don't know if that made her a bad person overall. People are complicated." "You think she was sorry?" "I hope so. I heard that after she got out of prison, she was trying to rebuild her life." "I think that means she probably understood that what she did was wrong." The conversation reminded me that the story of Meadowbrook Springs wasn't really about revenge or even about justice. It was about standing up for what was right, about refusing to be bullied, and about the unexpected consequences that can flow from making principled choices. I never set out to destroy Karen Butterfield. I just wanted to fight an unfair fine. But by standing up for myself, I had ended up exposing corruption, improving my community, and building my own success. And really, that was the best possible outcome. Not because someone was punished, but because things got better. As I sat on my patio one evening, watching my kids play in the backyard while Natalie read a book beside me, I reflected on how far we had all come. The community, the HOA, my family, my career. Everything had been shaped in some way by that first decision to challenge a $300 fine instead of just paying it and moving on. "What are you thinking about?" Natalie asked, noticing my distant expression. "Just remembering how we got here," I said. She smiled. "The trash can saga." "The trash can saga. Best investment you ever made," she said. I had to agree. Not the financial investment in Desert Holdings, though that had certainly been profitable, but the investment in standing up for myself, in refusing to accept unfair treatment, in believing that fairness and integrity mattered even when it was difficult and complicated. That investment had paid dividends I never could have imagined on that Tuesday morning when I opened a certified letter and felt my jaw tighten with anger. Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes standing up for yourself changes everything. And sometimes the person who tries to fine you for leaving your trash cans out too long ends up giving you the opportunity of a lifetime. I raised my glass of iced tea in a silent toast to that Tuesday morning so many years ago, to the trash cans that started it all, and to the choice I made to fight back instead of giving in. It had made all the difference.